Very special guest. We've talked to him a couple times in the past. He is now running for Secretary of State. It's Peter Lumaj. Peter, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Good morning, sir.
I thank you for giving us a few minutes now. Let me just kind of slowly get into this because I do have a lot of questions about voters and voting fraud and things like that. But the Secretary of State in the state of Connecticut is a very different position than the Secretary of State on a national level. Can you tell everybody the difference, or a little bit of what the Secretary of State actually does here in the state of Connecticut?
Well, in the state of Connecticut, the Secretary of the State is a constitutional office. In other words, the individual who's running for the office has to run a statewide campaign and will be the chief law enforcer, if you will, of the voting laws in our state, and deals with business law also.
So business law, voting law. So you are running on both of those things. And I actually watched you recently on a television show. Philip Marie had a television show, Wheel of Freedom. You were on that. You did a great job, and we're happy that we were able to track you down and get you on today. And I wanted to ask you right out of the chute. For the longest time, Peter, I've been a proponent of a national voting ID card, and it's been 10 years since I wanted to put this thing in action. Why can't we put a card together with a photo ID on it, with a magnetic strip on the back like a credit card? Somebody goes up to their local polling place, they swipe their card, and all of the elections that they can possibly vote for come right up on the screen, and whammo, they're done in a couple of minutes. Why can't we do that?
Well, I think it is doable. It's just the will of the politicians, actually, to want to do it. And we lack that will. Especially the Democrats have been lacking that will to establish a voter ID for the voters. The interesting thing is that even the Supreme Court, in a case called Crawford versus Marion County in 2008, it held that voter ID is constitutional. And the 24th Amendment of the Constitution provides that we have to produce those IDs, if need be, for free. In other words, we're not making it hard for anyone who is a qualified voter to have to be provided, to be given a voter ID and make sure that we establish their identity when they show up to vote. So it's just a matter of having the will to do it.
Okay, well, it's not like you said, it's not a cost situation for the voters out there. They don't have to go pay for this.
No, it's not.
It's certainly not something that is going to be very difficult for them to get. It doesn't break it down by race, because I know the Democrats want to make this seem as though you're prohibiting people from voting if you give them an ID card. Why are the Democrats against the voter ID card?
Well, they're always arguing that by requiring people to produce a voter ID or to produce an ID at all, somehow we're discriminating against certain groups. But the truth is that the fact that we would provide that ID for free and anybody would be able to receive one has no discriminatory purposes whatsoever.
Of course.
The Republicans are not trying to make it harder for anyone who is a qualified voter to vote and participate in our Republican form of government. What we're trying to do is we're trying to fight voter fraud. Right. And voter fraud has become an issue in our state. Each and every one of us remembers what happened in 2010, that if it weren't for voter fraud, my friend Phil Wally would have been our governor. We know what happened in Bridgeport when you had 250 absentee ballots listing their returning address as 1235 Park Avenue in Bridgeport, which turned out to be a vacant lot. Then you had a bag of ballots found under a desk, unattended, which turned out to be pretty much completely fraudulent ballots in that bag of, and no one investigated that allegation either. You had the other thing that you had in Bridgeport, again, you had in 2011, two Democrats, Foster and Finch. Foster was accusing Finch of voter fraud, and the current Secretary of the State admitted that there is voter fraud in the inner cities, and she said she's going to introduce measures to fight voter fraud. But the interesting thing is that Foster eventually, who lodged the allegations of voter fraud, was defeated, and Denise Merle endorsed Finch, who won the election. Now, when you have two Democrats accuse each other of voter fraud, you bet there is voter fraud. So it is in their interest that they don't want to produce or give people voter IDs to be able to identify themselves when they come in to vote.
All right, one of the things that the Democrats always hang their hat on is the number of people who have been caught with voter fraud. And there's a big difference between being caught and actually committing the crime and getting away with it. So let's just stick with the state of Connecticut. There are 3 million people, let's say, in the state of Connecticut as far as total citizens, somewhere around there. What's the number of people who have been caught now doing voter fraud or having anything to do with voter fraud?
Well, we don't have an exact number because what happened that every time that there was an allegation of voter fraud, the unfortunate part is that from 1958 to present, with the exception of 91 to 95, the office of the Secretary of the State has been held by Democrats. And then whenever the allegations of voter fraud were filed, very few of them were investigated. But the ones which were investigated from 1998, there were 17 allegations of major voter fraud in our state. 14 of them were substantiated. Now, those that were substantiated, they had one thing in common. The individuals who organized voter fraud were not ordinary folks. They were very well positioned and very well connected political party operatives, and they turned out to be Democrats. So that is a major concern that we should have. The other thing was that when you had a mayor in New Haven who called for illegals to be allowed to vote, which the allegation was that they voted in 2010, when non-residents were allowed to vote, when you had Acorn involved in completing the absentee ballots for certain, groups in the inner cities, those are concerns that the Secretary of the State should deal with, and if need be, those allegations should be referred to the proper authorities for investigation and prosecution.
All right, let me play devil's advocate here. We're talking with Peter Lumaj, who's a candidate for Secretary of State. Susan Bicewicz was under she was on her watch is when the Foley fiasco happened, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, she was.
Now, if everybody was tied in together, and like I said, I'm playing devil's advocate because I truly believe voter fraud happens every single day, but I need you to explain this to me.
Sure.
Susan Bicewicz was in control. She was Secretary of State, and all of these shenanigans happened in the Foley-Malloy campaign and election. Right now, she couldn't get a job in politics as a dog walker. Well, what happened? Why? I mean, if she was so helpful to the Democratic Party, why did they throw her to the curb so quickly?
Well, what happens with the Democrats is that the way I look at the party itself is that they will, respect you and, keep you closer as long as they need you. And the moment they don't need you, they're going to discard you. What happened with her was that she had a very good lady, Bicewicz, who worked for her office. Her name was Leslie Mara. She was the deputy actually under her. She was doing a pretty good job in trying to inform the registrars of voters about the problems that they were facing with the Secretary of the State's office. Now, when Merrill came to the office, she fired Leslie Mara, and she hired Jamie Spinelli, I believe that's his name. And so what happened was that Bicewicz was gone, and Denise Merrill came into the office, and she made sure that anyone who had served under her would be gone and that she replaced them with her own people.
All right, we're talking again with Peter Lumaj this morning, who is running for Secretary of State, 860-464-9490, 631-317-1949. If you've got any questions for the potential Secretary of State and get his opinion on certain things when it has to do with voting or some of the legal issues that he may be in charge of, feel free to give us a call. What are some of the more rampant ways people beat the voting practices? What are people doing out there to commit voter fraud? Just voting multiple times, and how are they doing this? Can you explain some of that?
Well, the allegations that we have so far, and we have conducted a study actually on this, is that the election day registration is going to make it easier for people to commit voter fraud. In other words, the current Secretary of the State said that anyone who doesn't live in our state can just show up, sign an affidavit that they live in our state, produce a bill, if you will, that they live there,
right,
and be able to vote. That is going to make it easier for the ones who are organizing voter fraud. Now, again, we have to remember that these are not just ordinary people. The ones who are behind organizing voter fraud are the ones who are more sophisticated. And the way I look at it is that as long as elections put people into positions where they can make decisions about how much the government will spend, who will be receiving the money, and how the government will exercise its powers, elections will be important enough to tempt people to steal them. And that's why we had to fight this.
Now, Peter, if you become Secretary of State, obviously you'll be out there chasing down some of these people who are trying to commit these crimes. What types of punishment do crimes, let's say like multiple voting, actually have with it? If I were to vote for a candidate 6 or 7 times, what's the penalty?
Well, that is a felony. And we have to refer these allegations, if substantiated, make sure that the Election Enforcement Commission receives the allegation and the district attorney's office receives the allegations and they are prosecuted properly. Now, what we have to do, we have to send a message to the ones who are non-qualified or unqualified voters that they will not cancel your vote and my vote.
Right.
Again, we want to encourage people to participate in our Republican form of government. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that when that right to vote is exercised, it is exercised properly. Otherwise, the will of the people, whether it's a Democrat or Republican candidate, it will be canceled. And we don't want people who are non-qualified voters to cancel your vote and my vote at the will of others.
Absolutely. Correct me if I'm wrong, too. I mean, I look at it like this. Voter fraud, if it's at an individual level, if you can snuff this stuff out now and basically set a precedent, let's say you catch somebody who's voting multiple times for a candidate, you slap them with a felony, you give them either jail time or a huge fine, it's going to slow down people who are doing that same thing. Because a crime like this, Pete, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, a crime like this, the individual who's running around voting 5 or 6 times for a candidate, they don't really have much to gain. There's no financial gain. I would think the big fish, the whale you have to try to find is similar to that explanation that you gave early on where there was thousands of ballots that had the same address, right? That's the person you really want to hammer, right?
Yes, absolutely. What we want to do, I mean, we're not concerned with any individual doing this. It is the organizers behind it, if you will. And all of us remember what Acorn was doing, going around doing this. All of us know what the unions are doing. So we have to fight the organizers behind voter fraud, because voter fraud is a white-collar crime. And I did investigate white-collar crimes in New York City years ago for almost 8 years. And I know how to identify a white-collar crime. I would know how to locate it. I would know how to investigate it and make sure that we prosecute it properly. And I happen to be an attorney by trade, so I know how to go to court and litigate some of these cases and make sure that the message is clear, that you come to our state, you're a qualified voter, we want you to vote, we want you to participate in our Republican form of government, but we are going to watch the ones who are trying to destabilize, if you will, the foundation of our Republican form of government by committing this kind of fraud.
We're talking with Peter Lumaj, who is running for Secretary of State, and actually the convention is this Friday, so a lot more news will be out there as far as who's going to be running against whom after this weekend is all over. Pete, we've been talking about voter ID, voter fraud. Let me ask you, you're against same-day voter registration in Connecticut. Tell me why.
Well, this is what Denise Morel has supported so far that concerns me. Whether it's the constitutional amendment, which is proposing no excuse absentee ballot voting, early voting, which is 3 to 14 days prior to the election day registration. I mean, her proposals are fraught with unforeseen risks of fraud and logistical challenges. From my point of view, she's compromising the integrity of our vote and the soundness of our political foundation. Now, if someone wants to come over, let's say from New York City, hop in a bus or a train and come to Fairfield County where I live, all they have to do, just show up on that day and sign an affidavit that they live in our town and they can vote. And that is a concern, because if someone organizes this and has a bus of people or a train load of people come from one town to another town to affect the outcome of a closed election, that is a concern, as I said, because the will of the voters will be canceled. And we have seen closed elections in recent years. All of us remember Bush v. Gore. Not even 600 votes decided the outcome of our presidential election. That's how common these closed elections have come, and that's why we have to be concerned that anyone who votes does not cancel someone else's vote.
All right, once again, our number is 860-464-9490-631-317-1949. We've got Peter for about 4 or 5 more minutes, and I appreciate him waiting around through the break to answer some phone calls from some listeners out there. Pete, we're going to go out to East Lyme and bring on Phil and get Phil's question. Phil, good morning. You're on with Peter Lumaj.
Good morning, Lee. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Bill.
Peter, could you explain a little bit to the people, to these listeners, about these electronic voting machines and how easily they can be hacked and altered via some sort of remote control devices and actually through the airways? So I've read up and done a lot of research on that, and I don't trust the electronic voting machines at all. And if you could maybe touch base on that.
And that's, of course, Phil with the Wake Up America and Wheel of Freedom. And Phil, as always, we appreciate you calling in and asking that question. It's a good one. You know, we talk about technology, Peter. I mean, can we get too far advanced? Can people, you know, or is it better to have blue-haired ladies counting these ballots in the basement somewhere, or is it better to be electronically savvy? What do you think?
Well, what happens with these advanced machines, if you will, the fact that they are computerized and computers can be hacked and can be programmed in the way that the outcome on the computer is not the intended outcome that we want as voters, that is a concern that we should have, because the allegations are, and I think it's been proven through the studies, and it was somewhere on YouTube that I watched a couple of times, that the intent was to vote, let's say, for X, and it was voted 6 times for X, but the outcome, on the other hand, on the other hand of the computer, it indicated after they reprogrammed it, we got the result that Y did win, even he was supposed to get only 1 vote. So until we reach to the point where our computerized systems are foolproof of not being hacked, I think that is a concern that we should have. But if we were to go back to Denise Moe, who is pretty much supporting these, registration online and voter registration online, and even unsupervised voter registration online, that is something that should concern us. Because what happens is that they are arguing that voter turnout can be encouraged by making it easier for people to vote, and we want people we want to make it easy for them to vote. But the interesting thing is that when you made it easier for them to vote, the voter turnout, for example, in Hartford last year was only 5.2%. Whereas if you go to a town where we had a Republican candidate running, for example, New Britain, where we had Aaron Stewart running, and other towns where we had Republicans who stood for something, we had an increase in voter participation. So in other words, voter participation is not driven by anything else, but it's driven by what the Republican or the candidate stands for, and encourages people to get out there and support their position.
Phil, anything else, bud?
Yeah, Lee, back in, I think, 2010, California decertified all their electronic voting machines because of this issue, and I believe they went to paper ballots to try to be more accurate. And so I guess the mystery is, how would you even find that these machines have been altered or hacked without literally taking them apart piece by piece?
Okay. If I heard you clearly, actually, the concern, as I said, but we should be concerned over here when it comes to our state, is the office itself, for the time being, that is being held by a Democrat. And this current Secretary of the State that we have right now, she has become pretty much Bysowitz 2.0. What she's doing, she's abusing the office. She's abusing the taxpayers' money when she issued the e-newsletter to her supporters. She has been holding debases almost comparison to Bysowitz's office. Right. And these are concerns that we should have in our state at this point.
Well, Peter, let me ask you one final follow-up question to that. We do trillions of dollars of banking every single day online. People transfer funds. People, have their checks directly deposited. There's credit card scenarios going on, and there's fraud going on with that. But we're trusting the value of our dollar to electronics and computers. Why wouldn't we get to the point where we can develop some kind of a program that would trust the voting that way?
Well, and how many times have we heard about these computers, including the banking system, being hacked, where millions and millions of dollars have been lost? How many times have we heard when credit card companies have been hacked, or insurance companies, or medical records have been hacked somehow? The computers have been hacked and stolen or being used for other purposes. So that is the concern that we should have over here too, because once we make it computerized and it's subject to hacking, we want to make sure that the ones who are writing the program for the computers are at least honest enough and have the integrity that they will write a program that is not going to affect the outcome of the election. And that is the concern that I think we should have, because the system has not been tested, is not up to date, that we can just implement it.
All right, Peter. Peter Lumaj, Secretary of State candidate. His website, peterlumaj.com. Pete, I appreciate it. Best of luck this weekend.
Thank you very much, sir.
You got it.